Hey, Upstream listeners. Today on Upstream, we're releasing a conversation I had on Turpentine's show, In the Arena, in June 2023, with host Jesse Jene and guest Emil Michael. Emil was formerly chief business officer at Uber and tells stories of some of the most intense moments he saw during the company's rise. Recently, it's been reported that Silicon Valley executives have recommended to President Trump that he choose Emil as Secretary of Transportation. Without further ado, please enjoy the episode.
On our debut episode of In the Arena, we're being transported into a tumultuous period for Uber, told through the eyes of our guest, Emil Michael. I'm also joined by co-host Erik, a startup founder, investor, and podcaster. Emil was famously the chief business officer at Uber during their meteoric and frankly incomparable growth from 2013 to 2017, as well as CEO Travis Kalanick's right hand. Few leaders in tech have accomplished so much in terms of raw user and revenue growth, as well as funding success. Also, few leaders have personally experienced so much turmoil.
So I got home, or back to the office with Travis, and then Eddie Q, who is always in the meetings, calls me. He's like, I got to tell you something. We're about to announce $1 billion investment in Didi. And this was the same day we had just met with Tim Cook, and he was picking our brain about our China business. And I was like, oh my God, I got played by Tim Cook. Holy cow.
Wow.
Yeah. Holy shit. That was my feeling.
Today, he joins us to go in depth on the #DeleteUber campaign that gripped the company and frankly, social media writ large in early 2017. Personally, I was taken aback by Emil's humility and candor about this painful period, and I enjoyed his reflections on how he might have handled pivotal moments differently, like Uber's unsuccessful bids to acquire rival Lyft.
We are here today joined by a very special guest, Emil Michael, former chief business officer at Uber, one of the most iconic companies of Jesse's and I's entrepreneurial career. And we are very lucky to have you, Emil. Thank you so much for joining In the Arena.
It's great to be here.
So we're going to jump right in as we do, and we'd really love you to humor us, and we're going to skip right to a very intense moment. And you're a unique guest in the sense that there are just so many intense moments that we could, no one knows where we're going right now because there's so many options. But we're going to jump to when Delete Uber starts trending, and and there's a big piece about it. And what I'd like you to do, if you will, is try to actually, before you just tell us about that moment, would try to recollect like what's actually going on in your day. Like tell us, because I'd love to understand your true perspective. Like, where are you when you find this out? If you can remember that. I don't know if you remember that detail, but the more like bringing it to life for us you can, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, for sure. President Trump was elected in November of 16, inaugurated January of 17. 7 days after that, he did something like I think it was the migrant ban or something. So, banned some form of immigration into the U.S. And the taxi drivers at JFK decided to do sort of a strike. And there were people protesting at the airport. So this is January 27th, like a week after. The nation is, especially San Francisco, is on fire about the world at this point. And I think I'm on vacation in Mexico and I get a call from Travis. I hadn't taken vacation in forever. And I get a call saying, you'll never believe this, but we suspended surge. Remember, Uber had surge pricing, and it was very controversial. People were like, oh my God, you charged me triple price during a snowstorm. And we sort of had for years to try to explain how that was a good thing, that it made sure that there were rides available. So we suspended surge during this strike. And one guy who was on Twitter, some blogger, was like, Uber's trying to break the strike. And you're like, we weren't trying to break the strike. We were trying to, get protesters home from the airport. It was like an act of goodwill, like no good deed goes unpunished. And he said, we should just delete Uber. And then it went.
That was on Twitter. That's a tweet.
It was a tweet. And it went incredibly viral. And it was sort of like this, holy cow, what did we do wrong? And you're talking about 500,000 people deleted their Uber app. And that's like
On that day
on the,
or like over the course
over
of
the
it?
course of the next 3 days.
Okay, but I mean that's still incredibly short.
Yeah, and Uber, like the revenue per user is really high, right? If you rode Uber 10 times a month at $20, 200, that's a big deal. Hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue for something that we're like, how do we like? What do we do wrong here? And in retrospect, I was there sort of with my phone ringing off the hook, trying to talk to people, and it was the most helpless feeling I've ever had because this thing took off. No matter how you explained it, it didn't matter. People were angry. This thing had gotten out there. It was an easy protest act to pull up your phone, hold down on the Uber app, click the X, and delete it. So it was sort of like the ease of protest made it a bigger thing as well. Sort of like the Silicon Valley Bank, you could wire money out right away, made it go more quickly. It was that kind of thing, and it was an amazing feeling of like, holy cow, we're in an environment now.
It's like a free fall. Like it's
Yeah, and you can't explain. You don't have time to explain it, and it doesn't matter.
It doesn't even, yeah, explaining it is not even going to help the type of people who are taking that action. So you're on vacation. Are you like, I want to imagine it. Like, are you like literally on the beach and then this is just like, oh my gosh, I like, where's my laptop? or like, I don't know. As someone who's not had any crises that reach this level at all, but have my own crisis in entrepreneurial life, I just want to know like how you felt and what did you have to do? Like, were you able to do anything at that point?
Um, I was at dinner at the pool, at a poolside thing, 8 o'clock evening ish, and I was like, I got to go take this call. And then obviously, like, I never went back to dinner. I had to tell people I'm dinner with, hey guys, I got to roll, get a laptop, spotty coverage in some hotel in Mexico. And then, hit the tweet stream just to see, and then see it getting more angry, more viral, more serious, more widespread. More of my friends who are people I know going, Emil, I can't believe Uber did this on DMs. And then, so me then trying to explain to at least people who knew me, I said, like, at least they'll listen to me. And they did. But then, like, that's a small set of people. How I make 50 phone calls or 50 emails,
You saved those 50 users.
but thought that they were messengers. So like maybe I would amplify this so at least people would understand what had happened when it stops. And it was just helplessness, anxiousness, sadness that the employees who worked so hard at Uber, who were doing the right thing, felt that their company was doing the wrong thing because their parents were calling them, going like, "What are you doing at this company?" It was because most of these startups are younger people, so they haven't been through as many of these kind of moments, right? So calling the key leaders to help them understand, it was quite a kickoff to what was a bad 2017 for Uber generally.
Totally a kickoff to a totally calm year. Um, so you mentioned something I want to go deeper on, which is like internal comms. So when something like this happens, or in the Uber situation, I think all of us know probably too much about the external comms. Like we know too much relative to the situation, like what was going on in the media and whatnot. But you're mentioning the very real personal situations. You've got young employees who are trying to parse this, trying to explain to their family. What else is going on in internal comms? Like, do you have a Slack that's like blowing up, or does someone create like a hashtag delete Uber Slack channel to debate it? Like, what else do you deal with internally in a moment like that that would help us imagine what it's really like to be working there?
It's a very difficult situation to deal with something like this because it was so unique. Like, when's the last time you heard of even today, a mass delete app campaign, right? So you tried to put out your message, like our PR team on Twitter saying, hey, we suspended Surge for this reason. We were not trying to do, break the strike. We're not strike breakers, but no one's listening to that. No one cares what @Uber is saying on Twitter right there. So it was this sort of like scrambling. And the weirdest part of it was usually in crises, there's something to do, and there was kind of nothing to do except damage control with the people, like our investors, like what happened, explain to them. And they're like, okay, I get it. What do we do? I'm like, I don't know. What do? We tell the world the truth and you sustain it. And like we plan, a future PR thing where we go on TV and talk about it. Who knows? But it was one of the most weird crises I've ever been in, because not only did we do nothing sort of wrong, but there was no way to correct it.
And it's having a real business impact. So it's not even just like a bad press situation. It's like there's a very real business impact. So you're feeling that all of a sudden you're reforecasting. I don't know. I'm hypothesizing here, but you're all of a sudden people are like, wait, my models are wrong. Like it's a business situation, not just, every press situation could be that, but has a real impact immediately.
Yeah. And I will give Lyft credit for this. That night they donated $1 million to the ACLU. Like within no joke, within hours. No joke. And I was like, that is some hardcore whoa stuff.
Oh my God. Media jujitsu.
It's super jujitsu. And they're like, basically delete Uber, come on over to Lyft. It was amazing kind of move. Yeah.
There's so many layers to this one, and one of them is political as well, which I've thought a lot about personally, just like how do you even have an appropriate commentary as a company when it's a white-hot political issue, but somehow this is everything like rolled into one thing. It's like a business problem, it's a press problem, it's visual, it's affecting people, and it's political with Trump and like all these personalities. How do you have to navigate the political stuff internally as well? Like, are people actually fired up about that?
Yeah, I mean, think about this. So then the very next crisis that happened there was that President Trump invited all the tech leaders to the White House. And industrial leaders, Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, Elon Musk, Tim Cook, all these folks, and Travis, right? Because Uber was a very important company at this time. And on the heels of that, Uber and Travis became you better not go to this Trump thing, because, we're going to continue deleting the app thing. So imagine this, you're like, okay, there's a new administration. We have a business that can be impacted by transportation regulations, labor regulations, whatever. President's invited you and other CEOs to this thing. Your employee base is going, don't go. Your customers are going, don't go. And you, for some reason, become the focus of this whole 20-person CEO meeting. And, he had to call the president and say, I can't go, sir, Mr. President. And so you're like, how do we get here to where, somehow we're the target of the ire of what had happened in that election. And, our participation in things that other people had done became so glaringly controversial. But yes, and you had people at the company saying like, well, do you ignore the president? Do you ignore your customer? Like, what do you do? So it was a really unique time, I'd say.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey listeners, it's Erik. If you're looking for more expert level conversations, but specifically about top negotiation strategies, then I have the perfect podcast recommendation for you. DealCraft, Insights from Great Negotiators, hosted by Jim Sebanius, Harvard Business School professor and renowned negotiation expert. DealCraft features interviews with the world's greatest deal makers and diplomats, from former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to Blackstone's Steve Schwarzman on their most challenging negotiations, from which Jim draws lessons for listeners. Not to mention that The Guardian recently called DealCraft a best podcast pick. New episodes release weekly, and I'd recommend starting with their first episode, which reveals how legendary entertainment attorney John Branca was able to successfully negotiate for Michael Jackson's ownership of his master recordings and the Beatles catalog. Almost unprecedented feats at the time, so don't miss out. Follow DealCraft, Insights from Great Negotiators on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're always looking for ways to streamline our work. That's why we use Notion for all our internal documents. It's been a game changer for us, and I want to tell you why. Notion is this amazing all-in-one workspace that combines your notes, docs, and projects. But what's really cool is their new Notion AI. It's like having multiple AI tools built right in. You can search, generate, analyze, and chat, all without leaving Notion. What sets Notion AI apart is how it personalizes responses based on your content. It's not just another generic chatbot, it understands the context of your work. Plus, it can search across thousands of docs in seconds, even connecting to tools like Slack and Google Docs. And get this, Notion is used by over half of the Fortune 500 companies. Teams using it send less emails, cancel more meetings, and save time searching for their work. It's designed to keep everyone on the same page while protecting your privacy. Want to give it a try? Head over to notion.com/upstreampod. That's all lowercase. Notion.com/upstreampod. You can try Notion for free, and when you use our link, you're supporting our show. Give the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI a shot today at notion.com/upstreampod.
It's also just incredibly distracting internally. Like, do you feel as an executive like we have so much other stuff to work on? I mean, obviously it's just so important in the first 3 days you talk about it, but does it actually become just like the internal topic for a month and you're like, I wish we could focus on the business or something? I just wonder how that feels when you're there and there's just, growing a business is just hard in general.
Yeah, I mean, these sorts of things are totally defocusing because whatever you have travel you had planned, you have to cancel whatever sort of planning meetings. You're early in 2016, so you're thinking about the year ahead, and everyone else is watching Twitter and TV and reading about this. So like the whole employee base is distracted. So it does have a real cost to efficiency and productivity at the company. But the people at the top, well, who else is going to deal with this stuff, right? Who else is going to talk to go do an impromptu all hands with a group of people who are scared about what this means for the company? So that's where your real leadership skills have to kick in and try to find how to allocate your time, how to what does getting past this problem look like? How do we not fall so far behind on the productivity that we're trying to do? How do we fix this so next time we're sort of a little like more understanding of the environment so you don't trip into something like this again? So it's incredibly distracting.
Was there a person who felt incredibly bad because they made the decision that kicked it all off? Was there someone just like cowering in a corner? I just have to know, who was just like totally innocent and just like, oh, don't look at me. Like, like I almost broke the company. Because also helping that person, I've had to help, again, different contexts, that person through things. Was there one person who was like whole teams that decided?
No, there's one person who innocently sent out a tweet saying, "Hey, we are suspending surge pricing due to the, problems at JFK," and it was, not a senior person because we empowered younger people to do this stuff in terms of whether it was a weather crisis or things like that, so that people didn't think we're taking advantage of hurricanes or those kinds of things. And so we had a whole protocol about doing this, and someone did it. And that person was like, "Holy cow!" And obviously, they were not doing the wrong thing. They just got unlucky.
Just a commentary on the times. We're talking about 2017. This was a time where Uber and there were some other companies who were basically like, almost punching bags for people who just didn't like tech. They were calling a bunch of nerds like tech bros as if they were doing like cocaine or something all the time, like doing these egregious things. They're just nerds building these companies. And what's different now is tech learned, I feel like the industry built immunity to attacks from inside the company. It would be like less than 1% of employees or just a handful of employees who would go out to journalists and they would concoct this, story that was out of line with what was actually happening, that was very negative to the company. And I feel like we learned enough from this that we started to build our own like internal media, even if just on Twitter, like people who would just push back. And that kind of culminated in, Elon is the most like strongest example of someone who just says, fuck you, like you're wrong. And if you're against the company, you're fired. And, I'm going to just just like contradict you in public. And I feel like if Uber was having those crises in 2023, you could have maybe done something similar, but maybe at the time we just as an industry had to be apologetic because we just didn't have the resources to like, directly fight back. That was the advice we were getting, right? Is like, just take it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a turning point in 2014, 15, 16 where the tech press became much more critical and less, adulation about startups and more about, the challenges in them. And it was a long-term change, but it definitely changed. And at that time, companies didn't have their own channels, their own Twitter followings. They didn't sort of have their internal sort of comms things structured in a way to be responsive to these types of things. So yes, we were caught a little flat-footed, but today I do think, companies can withstand some of these things, especially when they're not true. They contain them. And then also and this is a bad thing, but people don't trust the media more today than they did 7 years ago. So everything they hear is taken with a grain of salt. Um, yeah, and there's a lot of bad sides to that for as a country, but right now, at least there's always time for another version of the story or someone else's point of view on that story. And that often leads people to like, okay, it's a food fight. I don't know who to believe. I'm not going to condemn anyone or praise anyone.
And it seems like the two approaches are either the Elon approach or the Travis approach. Either you're totally outside of the media building heads down, and it seems like they're crushing it, or you're like in the media every day and willing to contradict push back on things that are wrong and make sure that your narrative is getting across.
Yeah, there are a few companies like Brian at Airbnb who just are somehow, because of their talent, able to float above it all. Right? They're just, it's the nicest company. You would never think that anything bad happened in Airbnb. And he just has a persona and a way of talking about his company that's really transcends sort of some of this food fight thing that I find really impressive.
I think it's really impressive. I'm a generally extremely optimistic person, but I have a streak of still concern that the desire to rip someone off a pedestal is so strong that the higher the pedestal floats up
That's just a matter of time for Brian.
just the fall, the more bones are there to crush at the end. I really hope that that's completely wrong. I'm an optimist at heart, but it scares me a little bit that it's just maybe not yet, in a sad kind of way. Hopefully that's incorrect.
Hopefully. I mean, look, I joke with people that Elon's Captain America. If you take down Elon, you're taking, the American dream, and immigrant, built all these great companies. And yes, he's got things, but yes, we have that nature in our press and so on to take down the top guy or gal, which we hope doesn't take down everybody. Then there's no heroes. Then what?
Why don't we transition to a different story? Maybe let's transition to the China one, because that one was so high stakes in so many ways. I mean, I'd be scared doing business in China, period, at a high level, based on what has happened to other people in China recently. Why don't you take us through like being on the ground, doing some of these, like some of the most intense or craziest things that happened there?
Yeah. So in 2014, right, you have to imagine yourself back to almost 9-10 years ago now. The optimism of U.S.-China relationships was at its peak. Mark Zuckerberg would go there and try to convince President Xi to get Facebook there. Tim Cook was there all the time. I mean, it was like, maybe we can open up and there might be a chance where we can do business there. Government was thinking about giving banking licenses to Goldman Sachs. And it was still the same president, but just a different time. And we had this business that didn't seem sensitive. It wasn't social media. It didn't have sort of any way of sort of changing what people think about Chinese as a government. So we were sort of allowed to slide through as not really a tech business or a social media business. And it was amazing because a lot of Chinese folks wanted to work for an American company because it was just exciting and different. The mayors in China who care about transportation in their cities, they loved us because they were like, they don't want a monopoly like Didi, a monopoly. They wanted us. So every time I go to a different city in China, the mayor would want to meet with me or Travis and like sit down and have tea and talk about welcoming the city. And do you want this in this building? And what can we do for you? And you're like, this is amazing. The competitive environment, however, was like nothing else I've ever seen. I mean, talk about Didi, which was the main competitor, texting our drivers saying Uber's not going to pay you this week to try to cause a rush at our office, with employees and doing stuff like that. I didn't love being followed every minute in China when I was there. I didn't love getting the same hotel room every day, knowing that, or feeling like I was being observed in the room and all those things. But but yeah, it was wild times out there and good times. And thank God we sold the company to Didi in 2016, because in today's environment, none of this is possible. So those were good times. I mean, doing the acquisition in 60 days, and the way I did it was we raised $3.5 billion from the public investment fund in Saudi in May of 2016. The next day, I called my counterpart at Didi and I said, we've got $3.5 billion more to blow in China if you want to fight this war, or we could figure out a deal. And like, she immediately came to San Francisco. We kept our phones outside so no one was tapping the phone, shades drawn. I was only allowed in there with her and her whole team until she trusted me enough, and I was allowed to bring my people to try to come to a deal. And then we met in a secret location in Macau, to close the deal with lawyers. We didn't leave for 3 days. High intensity environment. They didn't want the Chinese regulatory authority knowing about the deal, so we had to sign it and close it the same day and tell our own employees. And it was wild times.
So that has to be kept super under wraps in every way. Like how you just described some of the mechanics, but how do you go about secret keeping on that level? Because we're just talking about the fates of so many people, governments who do want to know all these details. Like, is there any other, besides just whisking lawyers away to Macau? I just feel like there's more to it. I want to know how you keep a deal so big, under wraps. Like, what else goes into that?
I mean, speed is a weapon, right? Speed, the faster you go. And that actually forces negotiators on both sides to actually come to agreements sooner. So it forces it's a forcing function. And it was, you had to have lawyers under like double secret NDA, right? And then you had to increasingly over time bring more and more people into the deal and swear them to secrecy. And, we kind of got lucky that we got the 60 days without knowing it. But I never forget the day that this was announced, and I had to go to our employees in China who were so dedicated. They bled Uber Black. And I had to tell them that we got sold, and they were like a room full of crying employees who had just made a ton of money, but were devastatingly sad. And I had Gene, my counterpart, there. And I was like, look, I remember saying this, they're not monsters, because the competition was so fierce that everyone thought the other side was a monster. It was one of the most wild experiences I ever had. And there were some weird things that happened in China. When you have a Chinese subsidiary, you have to have 2 Chinese citizens sign the docs, so they technically own the company. So I had to locate the 2 people who owned the Uber China company, who, if they absconded, it was a problem. So you had this other effort to do this, to get them in the same place, to get these like docs with red wax on them. I mean, it was a very, very complicated thing to do in 60 days.
And then this is like, I don't remember when each different chat app comes out, like Signal and all this different stuff. But another like just detail I'm curious about is even just communicating internally. Like, how do you make sure that this stuff is not getting out? And I don't feel like I'm a super paranoid person, but it just feels hard. It just feels like technically hard to make sure that you're messaging, you don't accidentally put someone on CC, like just stupid stuff, Like, so is there any other mechanics to that? Like, was there a chat app that was, better at the time, or are you just like on Slack and stuff, just on a channel where you're like, I hope this is really super lock symbol?
Well, so Slack hadn't infiltrated Uber yet in 2016.
Oh, right. Okay.
So people were using Telegram or text. Telegram, was a good app for that. But also, I've learned that my emails were like, people would send me an email, and my answers would be yes, no, or call me. That was it. So that no email that I wrote with the details of the thing could be floating around. So I had to keep a lot of it. I had a core team around me that were like deal machines. But yes, it's hard to keep that stuff down. But Uber was a pretty secretive company generally and compartmentalized, so we sort of had a head start on that. And Didi didn't want it either because they didn't want their employees to think they lost and they had to buy Uber. So we all had the same incentive.
There's no asymmetric. You weren't worried. There was no asymmetric warfare from that component. It was everyone had the same motivation. It's just more of a technical thing. Like, as someone who has occasionally put the wrong person on CC, I just I just feel paranoid.
Yes, no, call me. That's
Yeah, exactly. I'm learning things because that's honestly that's a good strategy.
And the acquisition, is it as simple as someone throws out a number, the other party throws out a counter number, and you come somewhere in the middle, or like what was it actually like?
Oh no, I mean this is like Chinese companies are headquartered, if they want foreign investment, in the Caymans. So you're merging a Caymans Corp with a two Caymans Corp, and in private to private deals, it almost becomes the ratio. What ratio of the resulting company do I get? Right.
It's like a blend. Like you're pouring water into a cup, and it's like how much? Yeah, got it.
And there's a lot of chicken there because you're doing subsidies to get riders. You're moving market share. China has, I think, 100 cities with 10 million people or over. The U.S. has like one. So the vastness of China and the amount of expenditure. So there was a lot of incentive for us to get that deal done, so we stopped spending money, and for them so they could stop subsidizing to do that. So it all just comes down to the ratio, but the complexity of the cross-border deal with the regulatory where the entities are was serious.
And I think we talked in a previous interview that you and Lyft almost got there, and that was a big missed opportunity for both sides.
Twice. I was super in favor of the deal, just because, again, the subsidy war was just unhealthy for the system, right? And I got there once, and then John Zimmerman blew it from Lyft side because he didn't want to agree to sort of usually you acquire a company, the leaders of the company acquire staying on for a couple of years, they invest into some amount of what they do. He didn't want to agree to that because he didn't trust that we would give him that. It was, for him, you were talking about like hundreds of millions of dollars up front, and then a few hundred to come, and he blew it on that point. And then some other time, Travis just didn't want to do it because he thought, we had the upper hand there. And I think, had we done that, the U.S. marketplace would have been a lot healthier for rideshare. But it didn't happen. And look at what Lyft now. Lyft now is trading at $3.5 billion. They raised $8 billion.
I'm going to go super general, if you'll humor me. What takeaways do you have from a human perspective on those two deals that don't come to fruition that you just mentioned? Like, it does sound, the numbers can work, everything can be good, and a human being who has just bled to start something has to sign on the dotted line. And so have you learned anything as a leader and that would make you feel like those deals maybe could happen, or you'd know what to say, or I don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I often tell people, don't read these negotiation books, because what the negotiation books or what McKinsey tells you about BATNA, best alternative to negotiate agreement.
Shocking. McKinsey doesn't have the answer to this? You're blowing my mind.
It's all sort of just half the story. The other half is what is happening with this person on the other side of the table. What is their mental calculus? And their mental calculus includes emotions, feelings of winning or losing, where they are in their life, and so on. And over time, I've really incorporated that into my thinking and negotiations. So what would I have done different with Zimmer in this case? I probably should have gone to his house and sat with him and be like, let's talk about this, because this is not the case, man. You built something great, and just just went there and met him where he was at emotionally, and it was a money thing too, but just like really kind of worked it out. And on the other thing with Travis, I probably should have, just said, let me, illustrate what this world looks like and this world looks like, and been pushier about it. But because he just didn't like those guys. So,
Right, of course. It's
so
normal when you spend your time in battle, it's normal to not like, and then basically that can be some of the core issues with M&A is, like, ultimately then people are like, "Well, now we're one," and then you hear about all these flame outs where acquisitions are terrible, and it's usually because at root, the people sitting across the table were like, "Fuck you." And then you ask those people to all play nice later when they've been, so it makes perfect sense, but it's like a what can we all learn? Because often, you know, it the other side could be positive if those people could all come to that place,
yes, and you could ring fence this or that. You're like, here's how we do it, right? And let's be cold, let's be business people about this. This makes sense. So now it's just you know, who do you want to spend time with or not, and how much? So let's just break that problem down into its chunks, and then you might realize, like, okay, well, this is probably doable for like a really smart business deal. If this is the combo of what this looks like, and that illustration of what this looks like is really powerful negotiating tools. It would have been in both
helping
scenarios.
someone live in that new world, like how, like basically illustrating that new world, like literally, like I'm gonna over exaggerate maybe, but to the extent where you're like, you want a nicer office than the other previous CEO just because you love that office, and you're gonna feel great if you walk into the building and that's your office. It's like getting to a place where you're like, let's live this world. That makes a lot of
So
sense to
it's
me.
not up here and ethereal. It's like what happens every day. Because when you break it down to every day, then you're like, okay, I'm going to see this guy once every 3 weeks. Like, whatever.
Yeah, you're gonna do a meeting together once
Yeah.
every whatever. Yeah.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, Erik here. In this environment, founders need to become profitable faster and do more with smaller teams, especially when it comes to engineering. That's why Sean Lenihan started Squad, a specialized global talent firm for top engineers that will seamlessly integrate with your org. Squad offers rigorously vetted top 1% talent that will actually work hard for you every day. Their engineers work in your time zone, follow your processes, and use your tools. Squad has front-end engineers excelling in TypeScript, React, and Next.js ready to onboard to your team today. For backend, Squad engineers are experts at Node.js, Python, Java, and a range of other languages and frameworks. While it may cost more than the freelancer on Upwork, billing you for 40 hours, but working only 2, Squad offers premium quality at a fraction of the typical cost, without the headache of assessing for skills and culture fit. Squad takes care of sourcing, legal compliance, and local HR for global talent. Increase your velocity without amping up burn. Visit choosesquad.com and mention Turpentine to skip the waitlist. I want to segue to the Tim Cook and Apple stories, because I know Superpump got that wrong. They got a lot of things wrong, most of it wrong.
I thought it was just a documentary. Was it not? Okay.
Live footage, yeah. No. And we can talk about what the things they got wrong. You've also talked about it, but maybe let's talk about the Tim Cook and Apple. What made that so interesting, so intense? What would you learn from that?
Yeah. Well, we had, I would say, 3 meetings with Tim Cook and Apple that where Travis and I were together. And I don't know if everyone does these meetings with Apple, but they're multi-hour meetings. And I don't know how the CEO of the largest company in the world has that much time to spend, but he did, because he liked that we were in China. He liked that we were doing one of the first apps that was maybe making something change in the real world in real time and generating revenue. So it was a lot of good. We were doing maps, and he was competing with Google Maps, so we had a lot of relevance to him. And so 2-hour brainstorming meetings, and Travis would pace around the deck, and all of them were really productive and great. And then two different meetings, weird stuff happened. So we had he was picking our brain in this latest meeting about China. How are you doing in China? And we're very open. It's not like you do an NDA with Apple or Tim Cook. You just kind of go talk to Tim Cook. It's not, you can't, it's harder to ask for an NDA or something like that from a guy like that. So I got home, or back to the office with Travis, and then Eddie Q, who is always in the meetings, calls me. He's like, I got to tell you something. We're about to announce $1 billion investment in Didi. And this was the same day we had just met with Tim Cook, and he was picking our brain about our China business. And I was like, oh my God, I got played by Tim Cook. Holy cow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Holy
Holy shit. That was my
I just
feeling.
How does that feel? Like, do you feel like, wow, he's playing 4D chess, or do you
Do
just
you
feel
reach out to Tim
offended?
Cook? Or you're
Yeah,
like, what the
you
fuck,
do
man?
text him and you're like, WTF? Like, what?
I mean, yeah,
what?
Travis
Yeah.
texted him exactly that. He's like, maybe you could have told me. It would have been a courtesy. I still want to share something with you, but you know, he was like, basically, sorry guys, play, big boy ball. Welcome to big boy ball.
Wow. But that, coming back to the people dynamics, like, do you actually feel like that is fair play, and that it's just like he made a calculated choice and obviously you're going to trust him less? Or do you feel like it's actually kind of a weird move, because who knows what, he needs to do in future rounds with every person he's going to meet? It feels a little strange to me, even though, sure, super powerful, but I don't know, seems like not a long-term game kind of move.
Yeah, I wouldn't have done that in reverse. And I think Eddie Q and I had known each other for years. He called me and he knew by the tone of his voice that this was not something he would probably do either. So this is definitely one of those things that I put in my brain to remember, and those kinds of things, that some people do that and some people don't. And I don't want, I'm not one of them.
And you don't know who they are. Like in any given circumstance, you don't know who that person is, because so it's just and I think this is another general question, but coming off of, everything that happened in 2017 and everything that happened in general, do you come away from these experiences in business as you go forward, you do many things now, like a little more paranoid? Like, I'm just curious about how it all hits.
More able to deal with it and more paranoid, right? So I'm more paranoid about internally like, I really didn't understand that when a company is being sort of attacked from the outside, there's a lot of people inside who sort of rebel against the company. They agree with what the outside people are saying, and that's leaks happen.
You're not one team like against the world.
Yes,
Yeah.
especially when it's repeated and sort of every day there's something there, and that disunity is very hard to operate against. And so would I do it again? You'd have to sort of deal with the disunity, like get the people out, make really hard decisions really fast, or fix them. And some of these things are harsh, like what Elon did. At Twitter, he's been criticized for it. So he took a Slack channel where everyone's complaining about back to work. He's like, okay, everyone on that gone, fired. And I know why he did it. Because of this, he didn't want the internal dissension at any cost, because he says that's going to break the company. On the other hand, I've learned that to just be paranoid about cascading crisis. Once something feels vulnerable, so many other people see that vulnerability and want to write or talk about it. So it's really, bad things don't come in ones; they come in like threes or fives. So you kind of have to be prepared for a sustained sort of situation, and you do have to have stronger internal messaging about what you're doing and why, and repeat it. But having the worst thing in the world is having your PR team turn against sort of you, which we had that because their
I can't
access,
even imagine.
their megaphone access, and we just didn't know it till it was too late.
I think a lot about selection filters in the same context of, like, how do you, sure, you can go like Elon to that channel of all the people complaining about your company and be like, hey, thanks for outing yourself, like, you're all fired. That also creates a certain culture. After that, you have to worry, obviously people aren't going to do that again, so it was like a one-timer usually. But how do you prevent people from coming in the first place? Like, do you have thoughts
Who are going to
coming
be
off of this?
disloyal during hard times?
Yeah, comment about selection filters. Like, how do you kind of create that filter coming in? And I'm not just talking about like hiring, but can you broadcast a certain message of, like, to make sure that the people come are aligned? Did you have an opportunity to do that at Uber, you feel?
I mean, I think, yes, you can do that to a large degree. You'll never be perfect, right? The Brian Armstrong Coinbase memo that he sent out, was sort of a version, yeah, which is a version of this is who we are. If you should know it on the way in, and I think companies need to be smarter about that. We were pretty good about that, um, but we got so big so fast. We went from 200 employees to 20,000 in 3 years. So and in so many countries in so many different ways that there was no way that filter was going to be strong enough because no one had ever grown that fast. Not Google, nobody in terms of number of employees. But I do think you can and should have filters like that. I think it's almost irresponsible to build a company and not have a filter like that these days, because you are going to have mismatch. And I do think we're a little bit of a bear market now. So you're in a little bit more in the driver's seat to be choosy on who you let in and who you want in. But some of the tone gets set too. We used to joke, if you're complaining about the cafeteria food, your boss should be fired because you're not being managed well, right? Or no quinoa, or we're gonna have cheap food, or there are messages you could send by how you spend money and how you do things, which again sort of attract or repel certain kinds of people.
Right. There's no amount of corporate values that can get around some of those actions that actually tell people how you feel about things and make them stick around or not. Yeah.
Zooming out a bit, when you think about the legend of Uber and how it continues to be told and will be told, what do you think is most misunderstood, even from people within tech, who, not just people who've only seen the show or something, but people who were around during this time at, not at Uber necessarily, but, within tech? Like, what do you think is most misunderstood?
There's this notion that the rule breaking or bending the rules on ride sharing was a bad thing and one shouldn't have done that. And if you think about that, you're like, okay, well, if we take the world as it is and you succumb to sort of the sort of small mafias that these taxi people created, or cartels they did with the politicians, and that sort of payola scheme that they had, if you don't break that, well, then you're going to have the old system. And so we broke it, and people are like, why'd you break it? And you're like, well, because this is a better system for everyone. It's better for drivers, better for riders. And guess what? We won. You know why? Because China, India, US, Brazil, Russia, all of them now legalize ride sharing. Most of the world has listened to their citizens and said, you were right, we were wrong. And so had we not done that, and if we played by the rules, we would have still been in that world. And I think it's misunderstood that, well, the world moved because we moved it. And every country in the world now adopted something that's better for their citizens. And therefore we were vindicated. It was a form of corporate civil disobedience. Like, these were wrong. And we were going to disobey them because they were wrong, and we were doing something that was right. And we were vindicated by, ride sharing being legal all over the world essentially now.
But I feel like in Silicon Valley, the culture at one point prized these things. Like, I do feel like it has been the concept that that's not prized or not good to kind of question the status quo, and just effectively, if there's some statute somewhere that says you didn't do it right, you're wrong. Like, I don't know. It's more isn't it more shocking that people in tech think that? like I don't know. Didn't the snake start eating its own tail or something? It's just strange to even hear you say that that's the misunderstood part.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like the cool part.
I think it's a little bit of this sort of narrative, this anti-tech narrative has made that not a prized value. Move fast and break things is now bad. It was good, right? There are these things where, AI is going to do this. Let's stop it. It's bad. Not about what good it could do. So there is a little bit more focus on the negative, which I don't understand, because our government works slower than it ever has. So you're like, okay, well, should we wait? Like, what do we do? Do we just wait for something to happen? Or do we try to do it?
Do you wish that you could have been a bit more slick? And I say slick in both the positive and maybe negative ways, like maybe transcended above it all in the way that you described Brian Chesky, or been a bit more like Elon and just been more aggressive, given that you guys were already thrown in the food fight and it was hard to to get outside of it, against your will?
I've thought about this a lot. I think it's a really hard question. Um, in some ways, I believe that had we turned the corner a little bit toward being a little more Chesky like a little earlier, because we went from insurgent to the man really quickly. Like we were the underdog, and then in like 18 months we became the overdog, like very fast. And we launched Uber Eats. We're in 92 countries. We're on magazine covers. As bonus, most valuable startup in the world, most fast growing, and that made the spotlight shinier. And had we sort of like smoothed some of the edges a bit and realized that like, hey, people aren't gonna rooting for us anymore. They're rooting against us, so we have to take a different approach. Was probably the better answer at that moment.
We were talking about how you had government pushback at times. We were talking off air how at one point you had a SWAT team descend in one of your regions. Like, tell us about one of the crazy experiences there.
And this relates to sort of the things that people understand about Uber. Like the resistance was unbelievable, right? This Las Vegas, when we launched in Las Vegas, a couple of police officers sort of ordered a car. This poor guy kind of rolls up to pick him up in a Toyota Camry, and they have a fully dressed SWAT team with machine guns take him out of the car to arrest him. And you're like, what, the fear that caused. In Italy, the taxi officers were so serious they put pictures of our female general manager on the light posting saying, you should hurt this person, essentially, all over the city. All kinds of crazy rules. In South Korea, it was legal for foreigners to take a ride share, but not legal for Koreans to take a ride share. So if a Korean got in an Uber, they would like arrest the Korean person. Just LA had rules on the color of socks you could wear. Germany had a rule that if you took someone to the airport, you couldn't take another passenger back to the city. You had to go all the way back to the city and then go back to the airport. And it was called the return to base rule to protect the limo industry. I mean, you had all kinds of rules you're like, that you're facing that were kind of insane. And we were not following these rules because they were dumb and they were bad for everybody.
Wow. In closing here, Jesse and I, as entrepreneurs, have both had our own versions of crises where some people stepped up and were super loyal, and some people stabbed us in the back in our own way. And and you certainly had that at a much bigger scale. I'm curious, when you advise people who've gone through versions of what I just discussed, do you say, hey, do you advise them, hey, never think about it again, just like move on with life, like it's just business, it happens? Do you say like, hey, use that as motivation to like beat them in whatever you do next? Like, how do you get over when someone like really fucks you over?
It's really hard, especially if it's your life's work or it's sort of a mission that you were on that was taken from you or
so much money was taken.
So significantly diverted because of that. So number one, I tell people just, again, make this filter on the front end a lot better. It forces you that at least you do. That's forward looking. Backward looking, you have a responsibility to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else if possible. And so if this person or this firm is out there, behaving this way, and you should be a resource for other entrepreneurs about how they behave. But, that's just how it is, and it's all factual. Then maybe these firms will change if they know that there's consequences, or these people will change. There's consequences to their actions. I mean, I don't think it's about vindictiveness, but it is about making sure we're paying it forward to the next people so it doesn't happen to them. And that's sort of the mindset I would put them in, and that's more constructive.
You've been very constructive in this interview. Emil, thank you so much for coming on In the Arena and sharing your journey with us. Upstream with Erik Torenberg is a show from Turpentine, the podcast network behind Moment of Zen and Cognitive Revolution. If you like the episode, please leave a review in the Apple Store. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at eric@turpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.